Hello, welcome to Arise.Works. This is Getting Started with Rendering in Houdini Mantra workshop episode 10. And in this episode, we will talk about lights, global illumination, render noise, how to fight render noise, how to convert any geometry into emitting light object, what is sun angle stands for, what the default sky preset tweaks are, how to tweak our rendering, noises, diffuse bounces, and all that kind of technical things. We are going to learn how to control those and make our rendering better. Let's talk about the lights, about the global illumination, and about the rendering settings. So I'll just start building up our very easy scene. I'll hold down Control, left click on the grid. On a sphere, I'll dive into my sphere. I prefer the polygon, increase the frequency quite a bit so make it smooth and spherical. Increase the size of the grid so it takes kind of all of our viewport. And the first light I'm going to talk about is the distant light, which is kind of emulating what sun does. The distant light does not have angular rays coming out of it. They come orthographically, basically at the same angle, almost as virtually infinitely distant light with the same energy coming from the same angles. So in other words, it kind of works like sun. I'll control left click on the camera just to set up our camera, again holding down the lock key to control the camera from the viewport because I prefer to, set it up easier. So here is our setup. Nothing, spectacular. So again, drag and drop the principal shader. Roughness 0.3 is fine, and let's call it floor. And next one, let's say principal shader. Let's call it sphere. Oops. Sphere, and let's make it blue. Okay, and as per usual, we go into the render view, press render, and we will now see what is going to happen. Okay, so far so good. We have some sort of result, right? But anyone who has been taking some art classes or went into the painting or maybe knows a bit more about rendering and how lights work, you might be thinking, about the fact that this kind of looks not very realistic, especially so if we tweak the lights to be like here, because this part here, let's just isolate our rendering region so we don't render things that we don't need to render. So this part here is a bit too dark. It has to have some bounce light going in and out from our floor. So basically it doesn't look all that realistic because bounce light is a thing that physically exists. And you might have already seen that in our very first, second video. And yeah, essentially you're right. So it doesn't have global illumination. Global illumination stands for, or it's just an acronym for, acronym is GI. You might have heard both of them, like GI is a global illumination. Is the effect that happens when rays are bouncing from a surface and they are getting reflected in another surface or material. So let's see. I went from the object to our out context, and I selected our mantra IPR. So if I now go into the rendering, sampling, and change the sampling to limits, you will see that diffuse limit, the thing that actually stands for the diffuse bounce, is set to 0. And if I increase it to say 2, as you start seeing, the bottom part of our sphere, I'll make a snap. The bottom part of our sphere starts to get illuminated by the bounce reflection, as well as the bounce reflection from the sphere starts colorizing the shadow part. Okay, so if I disable it, let's see what happens. Now, to my view personally, it's kind of like day and night difference, if you will, no pun intended. But you're saying like, okay, diffuse limit, why don't we make it 10? Because it's kind of heavy on the CPU. So if I, let's say, shift click on this spot and I disable the preview rendering method, and let's see how many seconds it will take us to render the scene that has just literally just grid, just a sphere, and just the sun. It took us 10 seconds. Okay, let's see what diffuse limits of 3 will do. As you can see, these parts are getting rendered quite a bit slower. So anywhere where bounce light is happening, it's going to take much more time. So it took 15 seconds. And if 5 seconds difference doesn't sound like a lot, think of it as a 50% difference. And if we have much more, well, objects and materials and diffuse bounces around, it will take that much more time. So think of it as 50% more compute time, or even more than that. So basically, for me personally, the diffuse limit of 2 works okay. I'm not sure about the difference in time. Let's see. 11, 12. Okay, about 14, 15 seconds as well. I don't know, maybe 2, 3 doesn't really matter the difference. But the point is, it takes much more time. So the GI, if you're rendering things like indoors or ArcViz, get ready for long rendering times, because the interior renderings are that's dependent on the global illumination. Otherwise, it will look fake and unrealistic. Okay, with that out of the way, let's see what we have more in the objects. So distant lights, got it. Sort of like a sun setup. Next up would be skylights. So if I just left click on the skylight, as you can see, something happening, and it kind of looks almost the same-ish. But as you can see, the distant light, that was the quad, became a disk. And overall, the scene looks kind of brighter. So why is that? Essentially, what we have right now is the skylight pre-made setup and the sunlight pre-made setup. And interestingly enough, I'll go back to our render. Let's see what we have. Let's see. Limits. Yeah, okay, we have our diffuse limit. So as you can see, our shadows are not have this drastic difference between the dark and the light, because the shadows are getting illuminated by the sky, which is blue in our case. So we can go to our, I selected the skylight, and the skylight, by the way, controls everything, including sunlight and the actual skylight. So if we go to the sky, you can see that we can tweak the sky color. And if we go into the sun, for example, the interesting part of this setup is that we rotate, say, our sun, and we make it kind of like a dusk setup, right? So it has the angle of 15 degrees above the horizon. As you will see, it changes the colorization, and it changes the angle of the sun, and it looks like we have long shadows, just as we would in the setup of a morning or an evening. So this is kind of useful if you're just getting started. I don't know, shading trees or outdoor scenario, and you don't have like the HDRI from, I don't know where, somewhere from the internet, or just if you're waiting for an HDRI that should be perfect for your scene, but you don't have it yet, skylights can do okay. All right. So there you go. Sunlight, the interesting part about the sun, let me see what was, okay, yeah, it was in the skylight again. So angular size is to control the penumbra of your shadow. So as you might already know, if you are in the daylight, and so let's say you have a I don't know, a garbage bin. Okay, so when it stands on the ground, anything that directly contacts the ground, as if we're standing on the ground, the shadow is very sharp. But the more it goes from the object that is placed in the shadow on the ground, the more fuzzy and blurry it becomes. So angular size controls just that. So let's say if you want to have the shadows fuzzier or sharper, you can tweak the angular size and you will get the result that you're looking for. So as you can see, this looks really not hazy, but really blurry. And if we have less than 1, it will become sharper and sharper and sharper. So there you go. This is how you control the effects. I think it's called penumbra. If I'm mistaken somehow, you can correct me. I'm fine. There is like 3 or 4 words that virtually mean the same. I'm always confused about that part. Okay, so I'll delete the sunlight setup, and next lights should be, let's say area lights. As you can see, it created the rectangle that will indeed emit the light. Now, personally, this is one of my favorite light setups for the studio setups. I think we discussed the area light before. It gets this kind of studio light look to your objects. Now, as you can see, we go to our area lights. We can tweak the color. Obviously, let's make it kind of cyberpunk and whatnot. So the area size controls what it says, right? So if we make the area size wider, the shadow blur in the horizontal will become more blurry, but in vertical, it will remain the same blurriness amount. So we don't see a lot of stuff going on, so I'll just tweak the exposure. As you can see, the vertical remains kind of the same, but the horizontal effect is very, very prominent. So let's get it back to 1. As you can see, even in the reflection, it looks, non-scaled. So if I make it like 10 in the y-axis, let's see what we have. It does the opposite. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory, right? So this can be really useful if you have like this setup 1 by 1, but you want to copy your lights. I'll hold down the Alt key, left drag and drop, and I make these lights to be kind of the overhead lights, almost like a studio setup. I'll give it a bit more space in the Y, and I'll actually make this one unsaturated yellow, kind of like the old school lights, and make the area size, let's say, I don't know, 8 by 8 sounds okay. Let's click the render and see what we got. I'll decrease the exposure of our pink neon, and I will create another light. Left click, drag and drop. Let's call this pink. Let's call this cyan, whichever, and this top. This color should do what it says. It's a turquoise color, I suppose. By the way, as you can see, the turquoise color plus the pink color, they result in a white tint. So this is kind of interesting, because if you now move your lights around a bit, let me change, kind of like this, right? So whenever the lights hit our sphere and they overlap each other, it will result in a white result, but everywhere else it will have different colors. Let's see what we got. Okay, as expected. So here it kind of has the whitish tint. Here it has the more magenta. Here it has the cyan tint or turquoise tint. And the shadows are as expected whenever the shadow is being hit by the light that is not, emitting rays. Here, it's getting tinted by the light that is hitting the shadow, if that makes any sense. So basically, this shadow is kind of greenish. This is pinkish. So there you go. Now, the lights in the the lights in the area lights that has been created right now, it can actually be anything like point, line, grid, disk, sphere, tube, geometry, distance, sun, whatever. So basically, you can go here and change it. And let's say we want the disk. And indeed, as you see in the reflection, and if we go here and look at it, yep, indeed, it does have the look of a disk. This is a rectangle, this is kind of circle, so all good. Oops, accidentally clicked the wrong button. Okay, for now, I think we will decrease the exposure of these two lights, and I will showcase decreasing this exposure. By the way, the exposure and intensity, they both control the same thing. They're just differently named, and they sort of control different. So if you're coming from a photography or somewhere else, just exposure will be, very understandable for you. So no problems there. Now I will disable the light. Now I can just delete it, but I can disable it here and here. Disabling in Viewport does what it says, right? And enabling it overall, again, thankfully, this is pretty self-explanatory stuff here. Now, what I want to do is have kind of interesting-ish light. So what I'm gonna, do now is I will create another object. Geometry. So I press stop, start typing geo. Here I'll be creating a triangle. So basically, we start with a circle. This might be confusing, but what can you do? So this creates, I'll press the H to home so we can see it better in our nodal view. So here we can see that I have, we have this disk, all right? So if I make it polygon and make the divisions 3, as you can see, it's actually a triangle, so, problem solved. Finally, I go and type wire, was it wireframe? Yeah, success. Or no, actually no. I will make it polywire. Okay, this makes it for a better one. So radius a bit more. Now, if I go back to the circle and make the scale larger, as you can see, we have a bigger triangle. So why are we doing this? Because I want to convert this geometry into the, where is it? Geometry light. So I select this geo, let's say triangle. I select it, press the geometry light, and voila, magic happens. So this gets automatically disabled, and we have the geo light created for us, which is triangle. And let's see what we have. If I go back to render view, we indeed start having this very interesting looking geometry light that we have. So let me go back to our material, to the sphere, and I decrease the roughness so we can see the reflection a bit better. So there you go. This is our geometry light. So if you have like any geometry that you want, let's say, I don't know, squab, right? And this obviously looks like a squab, but you can make this thing geometry light as well, as you will see in a second. So I disable these geometry lights. These geo lights I move a bit upwards. So essentially any geometry will do. It's not just, you can have like an array of rectangles. You have this weird squab thing. You can have, I don't know, glowing people. Basically anything will do, right? Okay. What else? I'm looking if we missed something, and I think the final interesting part would be the environment lights, of course. Again, I will disable the top. I will delete the top lights. Move this pink cyan here. What do we have right now? Let's see. It should be really dark. Yeah, it's kind of the same. Okay, enable. I have disabled all the lights. So what we have is the light projected from the camera, which I think is called headlight from the camera. It's the default if no other lights are present. So again, I'll just hold down the control, left click the geometry, environment lights, the environment light. And usually the environment light, what it has is just it's infinitely big sphere that's emit lights in every direction there is, and with the color that we define here. So if I go and make it burgundy, or however it's called on Pinterest, so as you can see, our environment becomes, this this color. You know how color works, right? Okay, so back to white. Environment map is a map that you define that will be working as our infinitely big environment. So there are 3 default HDRI environments. HDRI is staying for high dynamic range image. So it's important to have the high dynamic range because like the lights like sun are very bright. The lights like lamps are like 1,000 times less bright, maybe 100. So it's important to have this amount of contrast in your light. Anyway, so we have this Kiara 5 noon. So let's press accept and see what we got. Okay, very bright. And I'll go to our material, make it kind of like a chrome, let's see, 0.5, metallic, full, roughness lower. So we can see like our sphere reflection and what our environments are representing. All right. So this is the Chiara Lune. This is Lenang. It's kind of like a moody, foggy atmosphere, which is really great because it's neutral colors. I like the look very much, especially the fact that it's kind of neutral. It doesn't overblow anything. So good for just working on your shaders. And Skylit Garage is a good thing for your hard surface rendering because it has different intensity light objects, and there are a lot of light objects as well. So this is great for like if you're feeling really lazy and you're like, I wish there was like a setup for my super cool rendering of hard surface thing. Honestly, this Skylit Garage, it works just fine. Okay, so I think that's about it about the lights, and let's check out what other mantra settings do we have apart from the diffuse limit. So refraction limit, as the name suggests, is how many reflections and refractions will be taken into account while you're rendering your things. SSS limit is kind of like the diffuse limit, but for subsurface scattering. And if you think the diffuse limit takes a lot of time, SSS limits takes like a lot more time. Spoiler alert. Volume limit, same. You have like cloud going inside of another cloud, being different volumes. So honestly, on a computer that is your personal computer, having volume limits anywhere higher than 0 is gonna just skyrocket your render times into oblivion. It's actually, yeah, skyrockets oblivion. I think I'm mixing up up and down vectors, but you get what I'm saying, right? Hopefully. Anyway, back to the sampling. So I think it's time that we disable our preview. And first, I will select our sphere. Left click, drag, select our sphere. I don't like this black bar. Okay, so I disable the rendering preview, and as you will see right now, there is noise. The noise is those pixels that should be getting into a nice gradient, but for some reason they're not playing nice together. Okay, so I press down the home, so it becomes 100%. By the way, these two buttons, this one maximizes the view image to the viewport, and this one gets back to 100% of the scaling. Okay, so pixel samples is the amount of samples that's being shot from the camera to compute the lighting, and now it's 3 by 3. Usually do not make the numbers different, like 5 by 2 or whatever. It doesn't work like that. So you just hold down the middle mouse button here and drag it to the... first of all, I'll make a snap so we can see the difference, obviously. And I'll make it like 6 by 6. Now, think of it as this way. So for now, we are shooting like 6 by 6 is 36 samples from our camera per pixel. Previously, we were shooting 3 by 3, which is 9. So this is a square. This is a square difference. So 3 by 3 is actually 9 pixels, and 6 by 6 doesn't make it twice as long. It makes it actually 6 by 6 is 36. So 36 divided by 9, which is becoming 4. So essentially, it makes 4 times the difference of the compute power. So we are shooting 4 times rays, and it can result in 4 times of the increase of the rendering time. Okay. Now these pixels are they are standing for depth of field of camera, and I think they control also the motion blur of your particles or whichever you want to set up for motion blur. And only these pixel samples can control the depth of field and the motion blur. So first tweak these ones, but do not overdo it, because sometimes if you're not like making the depth of field, the blur, motion blur things, creating like pixel samples, I don't know, like as you can see, we have a bit of noise here. I'll make a snap. So if you make it, I don't know, 10 by 10, right? So we shoot 100 samples per pixel. As you can see, it takes much more time, but the result is more, less noisy, and it's more cleaner. And possibly the better way to do it, to solve this noise problem, will be just to have pixel samples, let's say 5 by 5, okay? And the noise is back, but what you can do is decrease the noise level here, increase the maximum ray samples, and increase the diffuse quality, let's say by 2. So essentially what it does is saying like 5 by 5, and the number of maximum additional ray samples would be 11, which makes it, I think it's multiplications, and the diffuse quality increases the amount of our pixel samples for diffuse by this amount, let's say 2. So everything else will be evaluated as it was, but the diffuse quality will be twice as good. And as we can see, there is virtually no noise. But you're saying, well, there's a bit of noise, so I don't know. Well, this noise from the lights, not from the shader, compute from the light is getting controlled. Where is it? From the lights in the sampling quality. As you can see, the sampling quality is for 1. So if for just these lights, we can make the sample quality of 2. I pressed another snap just to see the difference. Whoops, 2. As you can see, we don't have a lot of noise to go on, but it definitely has improved. As you can see, the previous is a bit noisy here, and the current one has much less noise. The gradient is much more smooth and defined. So obviously, if you have like I don't know, 25 lights, and you can just select all the lights, like drag and drop select and increase the sampling quality. It might be worse than just getting it into the Mantra IPR. In the Mantra RAP and tweaking the pixel samples or the diffuse quality. But again, depends on the noise that comes from your geometry or from your lights or from anywhere else. It might be better to tweak it per light, especially if you just have the environment lights, or maybe 2-3 area lights. Maybe just increasing the area light sampling will yield a better result than just pushing the pixel samples to the limit, because this will evaluate even the lights. Even the pixels that are not problematic. So if I just shift left click, as you can see, if we push our, let's say, pixel samples by 12 by 12, first of all, it will be really long, and these pixels will take a lot of time to compute, as you can see. Although there is virtually nothing happening there, just because the pixel samples is a huge number, it takes a long time to render, well, just gray pixels. It's kind of ridiculous. Okay, the next part of the rendering, obviously there is a camera. If you have two cameras, let me just showcase you. Camera number one, Control C, Control V, it becomes camera number two. Oops, my bad. Okay, sort of like this setup, right? So I get out and we have like two cameras. You can go to the outs, and if you want to render with camera 2, you just select it here or just press 2. And when you go back to rendering, as we will see, arrow P camera, switch to camera 2. We will see, well, basically what camera 2 is looking at. As you can see, yeah, it's a different angle basically, as you can see, and a bit further away from our reflective sphere. Okay, pixel samples, we talked about that one. Now, possibly limits, yeah, we talked about that one. And the final thing, I think, is the render. The tile size is the size of those little rectangles that are running around and computing our render. So for now, let me see. I'll go and make our floor quite a bit darker so we can see our white running things a bit better. As you can see, these little white rectangles that are running around, this is the size. Whoops, my bad. Going to the out. This is the size of the tile. So if I make it like, I don't know, 64, as you can see, the tile size become really, really big. But obviously, it takes more time to compute each tile. So let's say if you make it 8, they become teeny tiny. This might be great if you're computing some sort of elaborate subsurface scattering setup. I'm sorry, that's a bit of a mouthful. And you want iteration speed to be much faster. I was, by the way, just left click dragging my cursor around to change where the tiles are appearing. Finally, the max processors is how many processing power you will use to compute. So if I now press use all processors, I'm afraid my recording will start stuttering because it takes some CPU processing to record the video. So, but it does what it says. It will use all the all the cores of my CPU to render. Now, I actually don't need this much a lot because I have 16 cores, as you can see, indicated by the number of these white rendering buckets. There are 15 right now because it says use all processors except one. But if you want to specify how many cores is actually, being used for rendering, is in our case, we're just using 2, which is, well, quite absurd. So if you want to do some other things on your computer, like maybe you are exporting video, maybe you are archiving some things, and you want to have at least some of your CPU left for the taking. For this rest of the system, you can just change the amount of threads that is being used, and yeah, it's being obviously indicated by the number of these white rectangles. So I think that's kind of it that you need to know. The sampling, the lights, the global illumination, the noise, and different types of lights. I mean, obviously there is a bit more tweaking to be done with the lights, but overall I think you're in a good path to figure it out on your own. I think I have showcased pretty much anything you need to get started. So yeah, with that out of the way, hopefully you play with the lights, you play with the rendering, you play with the global illumination, and hopefully it will improve your renders. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one. If you like the videos, don't forget to press the like button. If you don't want to miss anything else that we have in the making, subscribe. And if you have ideas, comments, suggestions, leave them in the comments below. I'll try to read everything and respond if needed. And, have a nice day and see you later. Thanks for watching.